trans women of color. Kind of just, I initially kind of like brought up this idea to have this type of conversation because I think that a lot of people do need to hear from trans voices. I find that a lot of people take us at surface value. I think it's important to get into the nitty gritty. I don't think that I can necessarily describe myself in 2 sentences.
Well, that's why it's the challenge. But
yeah, for sure. I definitely feel that this is the conversation that needs to be happening. So
I agree. Brendon?
My name is Brendon Scholl, as you know. I use he, they pronouns. I'm non-binary. I'm not good at introducing myself in 2 sentences. I care a lot about a lot of things, and I don't care about a lot of other things. But I care about people, most of all, I suppose.
Can you say a little bit about what inspired the film?
It was kind of a very spur of the moment thing almost, because I can tell like the whole way it came about was Constantine knows the. Are you the executive producer?
Yeah, the producer and executive.
Okay, knows the producer Marco. He's known my mom as long as I've been alive, and maybe a little bit more. And he knows Constantine. My mom was in one of Constantine's others film, Man in the Attic, and he was over at our house for dinner, and he saw, my room is directly, you can see it from the front door. It goes like straight back, and then you can see where my room is. And he saw that I had these murals up on my wall. And he was like, oh, I want to see what that is. So we ended up sitting on the floor in my room, and I was just like showing him my art. And the 3 pictures that like came up a lot, the marker drawings, I had shown them, and I was like talking about what they meant to me and like what I was doing when I was making them. And he was like, you know, I work with the Trevor Project, and it's going to be the anniversary of this great, like this film that the Trevor Project did, and I want to do an anniversary film. Would you like to be the subject of that film? And I was like, sure, why not? No understanding of what would become of it or where it would go or who would see it. I was just like, oh, it'll be like a little thing. It won't be long. Like it'll be there for like a couple years and it'll be like forgotten about. I was 17 when that conversation happened. I'm 21 now and still talking about it. So I was definitely wrong on that front. But it was a very casual affair kind of situation where it just happened naturally.
Jem, do you want to say a little bit about what your first reaction is to having seen the movie?
absolutely. Okay, so similarly to you, Brendon, I feel like my sensitivity is like very heightened when I hear about these topics, whether it be like just how your family supported you. Even in like the rougher moments, I found that it was like really, really admirable because having that type of support really does save lives. Even when you got to your lowest moment, it's like without that, like where would you have been, you know? I think the support kind of speaks volumes. And I mean, I was like choked up, you know, just overall when you think about somebody going through this life where like it really is like a ton of people have their eyes on you before and then throughout. So when you said it was like it kind of translated to something different, I think that people, you know, they look at you as to who you are and like who are you going to be. And then when you become that person, they're like, okay, what's next? Like, you know, they're always looking to you for some sort of like explanation or further empowerment or further inspiration when like, you know, what we really need is humanized sorts of representation. So I thought that was really beautiful.
And what was it like for you watching the movie for the first time, even if it was just a rough cut or something, especially since you thought it was like, oh, this informal thing, and then to actually see it as a thing, what was that experience like for you?
It was like years ago, so I'm not totally certain, but it was very, it was a moment of me kind of being like, oh, this is like a legit film. Like this isn't like just a casual thing. This is something that's actually, people are going to see and people are going to be impacted by. and it's just me. Like, it's just my story, and it's just what I went through. And for people to see even part of that it was a very, because I'm used to talking about it. I'm used to, like, I'm very open to just sitting down, just like talking about what I've been through, and I'm very open about that, whatever has happened to me. So to kind of have it in that format of being like, I don't have to sit there and retell my entire coming out story and everything that led up to it was very interesting experience that I hadn't anticipated.
And I'm curious, and you can kind of both sort of trade off on this one. What's it like having something that's private become public? So, obviously having your private journey become, this very public statement. And then there's a quote in the movie about your existence being political. And this is kind of something that I've talked about with Jem, and just like sort of the importance of, as you were saying, of like humanizing and telling your story, and like, what is it like to have just you as a person being a political statement, right? And feeling the need to tell your own story because it is important to the development of the world. Like, that's, it's like you have to constantly kind of keep putting yourself out there, and just what's that like, taking something that really for most people is very private and personal and making it public and political and all that.
I think, honestly, when you brushed upon the point of like, it's important to humanize us in the way that like we go through the world, and like when we're born, we don't really understand who we are either. Like, I feel like society puts us through like this, series of like trial and tribulation where they make us like end up finding ourselves, and we have to come to these conclusions our own self. Because if you think about it like this, like many people don't necessarily know trans and non-binary people personally, and that's very true of like trans and non-binary people themselves. Like, we don't really have many people around us, and we don't have much like support in terms of like people who are educated about these subjects. So we find out a lot about ourselves, and then through that process is sharing with other people. Personally, I did not understand what I was going through at all. Like, people had known since like, I want to say like 4th grade, and people would call me like certain names, and I would fight them to like the death to just tell them like, well, that's not me, that's not who I am. And at some point you had to realize like they're trying to use this against you, but not only that, like you open up so much space for other people who, resonate with you by owning these types of things. So when I originally identified as gay, it was like people would be like, oh, so you're gay, and I would be very upset with them. I'm like, how dare you? I just like boys. But then at some point I was like, okay, well, this isn't something bad unless I let them, insult me with it. I'm like, okay, and so in that moment, yes, I am gay. Yes, I am trans. Like, how are you gonna hurt me with those types of labels? And I think that that's important, like, not only spreading the knowledge, but also, I think that we need to entirely restructure how we raise children.
Of course.
Kind of like what you were saying about how even as trans people, we don't know many non-binary trans people growing up. There's like a lack of role models and figures for us to look up to, because our stories don't get told in a positive light, typically speaking. And if they do get told, it's considered like adult. Like, oh, we can't show this to kids. This isn't appropriate for children. They can't see this. Why not? That kid could be trans themselves. That kid is growing up, is dealing with something. Seeing that could completely change their lives. It could save them so much struggle of being like, I don't know what's happening with me. I don't know why I feel like this. Is there something wrong with me? What does this mean? Versus having that model could be like, oh, that's how I feel. They're like me. That's who I am. And it would smooth the way, which is why I care so much about like making sure, like particularly like younger people see this. Like we've shown this at like middle schools and high schools, because I know that's when I was struggling the most and being like, who am I? Why do I feel like this? What does this mean? And I wish I had a film of a trans person just talking about it and being like, this is my life. This is what it feels like. So I could be like, oh, I'm not alone in feeling like this. I'm not the only person who feels like this. There are so many other people who do. and I just didn't know that they were even out there. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, no,
Okay.
absolutely. And I'm curious, and you can kind of interpret this however you want, but what was the process of identifying with your new name? Like, kind of just, you know, because obviously, like, I've had the same name my whole life. So what is it like kind of choosing a new name and then like, having become, like, almost growing into that name, like realizing, oh, that is my name, that is who I am? And this, from either of you.
Go first.
You can go first. Go.
So, it's kind of embarrassing because I was really into like emo music and bands when I was picking out my names. So I'm not sure if you know, but I spell my name Brendon, and the reason behind that is because I was really into Panic at the Disco. So I named myself after Brendan Urie in like 2016 or 17 or something. But I all the names I tried were all like band members' names. Like I went by Ryan for a little bit. I went by Tyler. Like they were all names that I had chosen from things that I liked and things I cared about. And I think nowadays, like if I was into something else, I wonder what names I would have chosen. Like what would I have done? And it's kind of, it's almost a freedom in a way where you don't have these associations. You have your own personal associations with your name. So, sorry, I totally just put my hand over the microphone. You have your own personal associations that you can choose what your name means to you, and you can choose what you want to go by. What do I want to be associated with, and what do I want my name to mean to myself? Which is something that I feel like not a lot of people get that opportunity.
No.
Or feel like they have the opportunity to do that. Because anyone can change their name if they don't like their name. But it's just something that has become associated with trans people exclusively. But it's a freedom everyone can have. But it's just something that's become so heavily associated with trans people. That's only something trans people do. But it doesn't have to be. Anyone can have that freedom to be who they want to be and go by a new name because this is more in line with who I am.
In relation to my name, I was kind of like, it was gifted to me in a way. Kind of went throughout my life definitely feeling uncomfortable with the way that people said my name. There was like a specific diction and way they said like, and it would kind of like put me down. And then I was around like high school, and I was experimenting with like fashion and like just like gender neutral styles and everything. And my one professor was like, you remind me a lot of Jem. I had like a friend named Jem who like, you know, had your name. And I was like, well, that's really interesting because like the way that I see myself, I do want to, you know, embody like an like bigger than life, larger than life persona and like, you know, exalt myself above where I am right now. So when I heard that name, I was like, okay, that symbolizes like the light that is inherently inside of myself, like the light that I'm going to continuously try and find and follow, you know. But like you said, a lot of things that trans people go through are not exclusively reserved for trans people. I think that we kind of just like categorized it as like, you know, whether it be a gender affirming surgery or like changing your name, like anybody can have a gender affirming surgery, anybody can change their name. But because it's only been like singularly reserved to the trans experience, I think that like people don't realize how liberating it would be to see how like widely applicable these types of things that we go through are.
And to, like, if we could normalize that, that would open the door for even trans acceptance as a whole, where it's like, because there's this heavy association with trans things as, like you're saying, being only for trans people. But if it's acknowledged as anyone can do this, then that becomes like one less thing that people could this is just how my brain potentially could use against. Is like, well, they're doing this thing, so that's wrong. It's like, well, actually, everyone can do this thing. Everyone's doing this thing. So that your argument right now has no meaning.
What's your response to all the horrific anti-trans legislation that's happening now, and the Don't Say Gay bill, and obviously it feels horrible, but like if you could say something to you know, a gay kid or a trans kid growing up in Florida, for instance? What would you say to them?
I think I would say that, like, your truth, whether it, like, loses people that you love or people are going to be against you, is worth following. I know that that's technically hard when, like, the government is literally putting bars on, like, how you can express yourself, which is a very, very scary, because in general, if you think about how trans kids and gender nonconforming kids, you know, they grow up feeling like, you know, I don't know the answers about myself, I have to figure them out. So now, on your journey to figuring them out, you're not necessarily allowed to. That makes things a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
But I think in response to it, what we should definitely realize is, like, institutions like this one play a major role and have a responsibility to, you know, figure out how they can better support trans and gender nonconforming folk, because when you think about the youth that are in those states, now they see maybe moving out to college or, you know, moving to a more accepting state as an escape. So for me personally, I was from Long Island and I escaped here. Like, FIT was my escape because where I was at home, I was not being seen, I was not allowed to do, I was not allowed to be, I was not allowed to dress, wear makeup, like my hair was being shaved, like I was in like a prison of its own, you know, making. So on my journey, you know, coming to this school was an escape of itself. And my experience here is like I've kind of been somewhat of a pioneer in terms of gender expansion, because I wasn't a trans student that came here as a trans student. I was a trans student that was like questioning, you know, going through a series of like, well, who am I? What do I want to do? And I realized that once I got into the institution, that it was like, well, you know, you registered as male, so that's what we have to keep you as. Or that's how we have to, like, you know, work with your dynamic. And I'm like, understand that, like, I am a trans student. I am coming here to transition. I am coming here to, you know, discover more about myself and breaking down boundaries that way. But in relation to that, it's more about, like, how do we go about supporting trans and gender nonconforming students from the future, like in the future, from now into the future. I think that, like, that's something to pay attention to, because more and more as these legislations come out, and, you know, it's basically like a war on the youth, and our day-to-day life feels like war. So imagine what it's like now that there's like systematic, you know, consequences for literally just being yourself. It's a hard reality for sure.
If I could say anything to those kids, I would want to make sure that they understand that the legislation is not in any way reflective of what is right or wrong. Just because the legislation is saying this one thing does not mean that that is the truth or that that is what matters. The legislation can say that, like in the Don't Say Gay bill, that that's not something appropriate for children. That doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean it's true, because it's not. Trans and gay people, we exist as children. We like there are gay and trans children in the world, and to deny their existence, or to say that only trans and gay people you only become gay and trans when you become an adult, is just a denial of reality, and is a denial of people's experiences and their own truth. So just keep in mind, just because the legislation says one thing doesn't mean it's right.
Well said. Are there any questions from the audience? Go ahead. And I'll repeat the question if people can't hear.
The whole subject of transgender youth and the progression in society is a big shift. And even progressive minds still don't know how to deal with it. Do you feel that this is, unbeknownst to you and you know, both of you, that this was thrust upon you? Was it something that, you know, because you now are kind of champions for an awareness of your community, of a community in society? Do you feel that this is now, like your flag bearers, that you have to continue and educate people and to do this?
So he's asking, do you feel like you have to educate people, and do you feel like this has been sort of thrust upon you to kind of become these figures for, other people who might not be able to be as vocal?
I do feel like living this life, especially within our generation, I feel like these structures have like already been created for us. These feelings have already been institutionalized. If you watched this documentary that's on Netflix called Disclosure, basically just goes through lots of different intricacies of what trans people go through and how media has shaped a public opinion about trans people. So for us to have to kind of grow up in a society that has already accepted those things as normal, I would say that our existence on a day-to-day basis serves as like enlightenment. Like people learn from me every day, and some days, most days honestly, I don't know that I'm teaching people. Like I'm kind of just like living, I'm experiencing, I'm trying to find and follow, like I was saying, that light that is like inherently been guiding me my whole life. But yeah, I never really realized how much I was influencing people until people would start saying like, no, Jem, like you have done so much for me in this way. And in a way, you spend so much of this existence like, well, how do I figure out what is so authentically me? And then people are like, you're doing great, right? Like the light is being shined upon us as well. And it kind of returns a feeling of self-worth. I've definitely have some friends in here who have like actually changed my life, and I attribute part of my survival to them.
Yeah, it's, sorry. like I completely understand, because it is kind of, we don't really have a choice about people learning from us. Like people, when you are, because I've had this experience a lot, where when you're the first trans person that someone has met, they have all these questions, and they kind of have the assumption that it's your job to tell them, or it's your job to teach them, which I'm personally okay with it, but it's not. It's not the job of the oppressed to teach the oppressor about themselves. It's not. It's the job of the oppressor to learn on their own and to like read and go out. We're not just unending repositories of information where you can just ask us anything you want. We are people. We're people, we're humans. We're not dictionaries. We're not academic journals that you can just come to and read and learn. It's not something that we ask for. It's something that we don't really have much of a choice, where people expect it from us. And if you don't do it, there's like this almost like, well, why? Why aren't you answering my questions? Why aren't you telling me these things? It's like, 'cause I don't have to, and I shouldn't have to. If you want to learn about it, you can go out and you can learn about it. I'm not the only trans person in the world. There are published books and published articles and all these videos that you can go out and find and learn on your own. You don't need to know a trans person to care about our struggles or to learn about our struggles.
Right. And that's actually something that has like really come across to me in my life, where like I recognized, especially through watching that documentary, 80% of people don't know a trans person. And so like I was saying, it's the same aspect with trans people. We're part of that 80% most of the time. So it's like that you're asking me questions sometimes that I don't even really know. Like, I've had to do my own research as a trans person. I don't come equipped with all the answers. I have to learn my own self. So it's like, at some point, sometimes it does become exhausting, but in the same breath, I am somebody who can I can speak about my life in a way that I hope people will listen. I hope people understand. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thanks to both of you for being so open and sharing your thoughts and feelings, and thank you, of course, for letting us screen the movie, which was really amazing. So let's have a round of applause for our guests. And thank you to everyone who came out on a Tuesday night. We appreciate it.